segment and angle bisectors. We're going to start off with a warm-up with the distance formula. So remember that the distance formula, you may want to write it, is the square root of x1 minus x2 squared, y1 minus y2 squared. Okay, so we're going to start with these points. Go ahead and label them. This is our x1 and our y1. Then this is x2 and y2 because it's just the first and the second pair of points. So I'm going to go ahead and write them right underneath the equation that I have. So my x1 is -7. My x2 that comes from the second pair of points is -3 squared. Then my first y value is 10 and I'm subtracting y2, which is 4. Okay, we're going to simplify these down. So -7 minus 3 is -10 squared, and 10 minus 4 is 6 squared. Remember that when you're squaring something, you get 10 squared is really doing -10 times -10, and that's going to become a positive. So this is positive 100 plus 36, which is 136. And I want to take the square root of 136. The square root of 136 is about 11.66. So our first one in here is going to be 11.66. Okay, so I'm going to erase this and I'm going to leave my equation there so I can go based off of that. The second one, x2 is going to be -4 minus -2 squared, because again, x1, y1, x2, y2. So then I'm going to put my y's in, and my y's are going to be -1 minus 11 squared. So now I'm going to simplify this down, and don't forget that this becomes plus plus, so it's still going to give me a -2. This is going to be a -12. Simplify that even more. I get 4 and 144, which is 148. When you put 148, the square root of 148 in your calculator, you're going to get 12.17 as your second one. Okay, so then our third one, we're using the points that are given to us in the ordered pair here. So we have to tell what those points are to begin with. So this is over 1, 2, 3, and up 1. And this one is back 2 and down 3, so -2 and -3. Okay, so you can decide which one you want to be x1 and which one to be x2. If you didn't reverse order than me, that's fine too. You're going to get to the exact same answer. You're just going to flip-flop your points. Okay, so when I put this into the equation, I'm going to do 3 minus -2 squared, and then my y value is going to be 1 minus -3 squared. Okay, so this becomes a plus plus, and I really have 5 squared. This becomes a plus plus, and I get 4 squared. So simplifying that, I get 25 and 16, which is going to be the square root of 41, which seems to be a common theme that we keep getting, which is about 6.4. So those are reviews of your distance formulas. Okay. So let's move on to the bisectors of segments and angles. So a midpoint meaning the middle. It is a point that divides a segment into two congruent segments. So this says in the activity above, what are those? Well, we're going to come back to what those are because we haven't learned the formula for that. But if you had a line, you would measure in and say, oh, this might be 4, this has to be 4, so this is my midpoint right there because it's the same on both sides. Okay, so that would be the midpoint of a line. A segment bisector, the segment, the ray, or the line that intersects a segment is called its bisector. So going back to the same thing, this line right here, that would be your bisecting line. So again, we're going to skip in the activity above on these two because we're going to see them below because we haven't learned the formula yet. So the midpoint formula. Okay, so when you're using this, again, you're using points from the coordinate plane. And here's what the formula is. You're doing x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And here's kind of how I would compare it to. I would call it averaging. So if you have your grades for math, those are your X's. If you only have 2 grades, you have a 50 and 100, you would average that and do 100 plus 50 and divide it by 2 to get 75. And maybe this one is your English scores, same thing, you would add them together and divide by 2, so you'd have 2 different points because of the 2 different classes. So it's just averaging is all you're doing. All right, examples using the midpoint formula. So in letter A, I'm going to go ahead and label these because I think that that's the easiest thing to do. You're able to follow the equation better. So I'm going to write the equation up above, which you guys already have, but since I erased my screen, I don't. And then we're going to fill in from there. Okay, so my x1s. x1 is here and x1 is here. So we're doing negative 3 plus 4, dividing it by 2. Then the y's that we're doing are negative 1 plus 3 and dividing it by 2. So we're going to add these together and we get a positive 1 divided by 2. And this one we're going to do 2 divided by 2. And then we just solve those. Well, 1/2, you can either leave it as 1/2 or you can write it as 0.5. And then 2 divided by 2 is 1. So either of those answers are going to be correct, and both of them are fine to put. Okay, so the same thing on letter B. x1, y1, x2, y2. So my x's are going to be 3 plus negative 4 divided by 2. And my y's are going to be 5 plus 0 divided by 2. So 3 minus negative 4 is negative 1/2, and 5 halves. So you can leave this in fraction form. If you gave me that answer right there, that's fine. If you change this into a decimal and you put negative 0.5 and 2.5, that would also be correct. Usually in my directions, I'll tell you which one of those that I want you to do. All right, moving on to the next ones on the next page. So find the coordinates of the other end point. So right now what you have is the midpoint and a segment. So this would be x1 and y1. We don't know x2 and y2. That's what we're trying to figure out. So here's how you're going to set that up. Kind of the same way here. The inside you have x1 plus x2 divided by 2. Okay, well, you have x1. We don't know what our x2 is. We're looking for that and dividing it by 2. Then on this side, it's usually y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Well, we know that y1 is negative 2. We don't know what y2 is, dividing it by 2. But what we do know is we know what it's equal to. This one is equal to 0. This one is equal to 1/2. So now it's just an algebra problem, which some of you are like, yes, I love algebra, and others of you are like, this is the worst thing ever. So we're going to multiply this to the other side to get rid of it. Well, 0 times anything is just 0. So I have 2 plus x2 equals 0. So I'm trying to isolate this x2 by subtracting, and I get negative 2. So the first part of my answer is negative 2. Then I'm solving this side. Same thing, we're going to multiply it by 2. So 1/2 times 2 is really just 1. So negative 2 plus y2 equals 1. Add 2 to the other side, and I get 3. So the point in the middle of this is negative 2, 3. Okay, so we're going to do the exact same thing for the one below that. And you can kind of graph these out too, because that might help you a little bit also. So we're going to set this one up. This is our x1 and our y1. So we know 2 plus our x2 divided by 2. And we know 6 plus our y2 divided by 2. And what I know is it's equal to negative 1 and equal to 1. Because this is what it's equal to. It's equal to the midpoint. Okay, so from here, again, what we're doing is we're solving this for our x value. So we're going to move the 2 to the other side. So now I have 2 plus x2 equals negative 2 because you multiplied it. I'm trying to isolate this variable. So I'm going to subtract 2, and I get negative 4. So the first part of my ordered pair is negative 4. Same thing on this side. Multiply it by 2. So I get 6 plus y2 equals 2. Subtract 6, and I get negative 4. Okay, so those are your other points of that. That's kind of tricky, but with a little practice, you should be good at that one. Okay, then what an angle bisector does. So we worked on line segments and what the line does when it bisects. So what does an angle bisector do? It's a ray that divides the angle into two congruent angles. And again, congruent, remember, means the same, and they are equal measure. So this first one is really, really easy. If you know that these are congruent, so this little symbol here means congruent, means the same. So if I know that this one is 41 and they're congruent, well, that one is 41. So we would say, let's put another, let's call this T. So if we want to say the measure of angle PQT is also equal to 41 degrees. Okay, the next one's a little bit harder because we're actually solving this. But what you know from these little lines right here is that they're congruent. Well, congruent means equal. So 26 is equal to 5x plus 11. So now you need to solve this for x. So the first thing you're going to do, so now I have that mental math, that's a 5, not a 3. 15 is equal to 5x. Then you're going to isolate the variable by getting rid of the 5, and that 3 is equal to x. Okay, so we know that 3 is equal to x, but if you wanted to make sure that these were the same, you would plug it back in. You would say 5 times 3 plus 11 and solve that. Well, then I get 15 plus 11. 15 plus 11 is 26, and 26 is what both of these should be if they're congruent. So that is angle and segment bisectors.